Okay. So welcome everybody to our Tuesday morning energizing class. Here we are. And we've been working through the theme this week of being more comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it seems like life is kind of bringing us into that place, whether we like it or not. So yesterday we looked at how to create space around discomfort, how to not be so reactive to it. And today we're working on seeing the truth. And this is a big theme in yoga traditionally, trying to understand the truth of who we are as human beings. So just briefly to bring a little yoga philosophy into this, I know it's not Philosophy Thursday, but the causes of suffering, or the kleshas in yoga, are what the very first two deal with our level of ignorance. And the idea is, we've talked about this before, is that we are actually created as almost like a divine sort of step down for energy from the universal source to the earth. That we have this sacred job as an incarnate being to see about learning more about our divine roots or our divine home. So the process of practicing yoga is meant to help us kind of peel back the layers, all the expectations, all the disappointments, all the judgments that have accumulated over our lifetimes, or maybe even previous lifetimes, and to see the truth of our divinity, see the truth of our perfection. So there are a lot of stories, and Denise was mentioning, or no, sorry, Darkis was mentioning at the class that we'd done together years ago about the stories we tell ourselves. It's going to be kind of the same sort of theme. The stories, like I said, the judgments, the expectations, some of them culturally placed, some of them we've adopted independently. And those things hold us back from seeing the perfection of who we are. Maybe we're supposed to be 20 pounds thinner. Maybe I was supposed to be a boy. Maybe I was supposed to have achieved a certain level in my career. Maybe the souffle I made last night was supposed to be different. And all of these judgments that we lay upon ourselves hold us back from seeing the truth of who we are. So yoga today in particular, but all days, we're going to really look at those boxes we build for ourselves, the judgments we've layered into ourselves, the expectations of our poses in particular during our class today, and see if we can start to peel some of those layers back. Obviously, that doesn't happen in one yoga class, but what would happen if we practiced like this all the time? If we had these ideas clear in our mind every time we approached our yoga mat and we had a daily practice, over time, we would stop being held so hostage to these culturally placed ideas and to our own ideas that we've adopted over the years for whatever reason. So I'd like to start in a seated position, as I said, hip joints higher than the knee joints. You can use a chair, that's perfectly fine. If it's comfortable for you to close your eyes, you might do that. If it's too fresh in the morning, you're afraid to go back to sleep, just maybe look down at the floor. So at least your eyelids are covering the majority of your eyeballs. And we'll just settle into a comfortable seat. Don't be afraid to adjust the cross-legged traditional yogi seat. Again, an idea you may have adopted earlier in your yoga career that no longer serves you. So let that go. Make sure that your hips and knees and low back all can find some ease here, that your shoulders feel like they're being supported by that strong base. And begin to breathe softly in and out through the nose. See if you can be somewhat captivated by your breath. Trying to make the breath as quiet as you can at this point in practice. Feel the breath move in through the nostrils and down through the throat and into the chest. Notice the subtle movements elsewhere from the breath rhythm. And simply noticing not only your physical sensations in this sitting position, maybe your mood or energy level, but then come to the level of thought. Typically, when we have thoughts that are uncomfortable, we have a coping strategy. We have a distraction. Very commonly for me, it's food, but it could be exercise, could be shopping, could be, calling a friend. Nothing that's negative per se, but it's important for us to recognize when we, divert from being aware of our present moment experience. And it's usually the stimulus of an uncomfortable thought. So while we're just sitting here quiet before we begin movement, see if you can just kind of observe your thoughtscape, just like you'd look at a landscape. See if you can observe your thoughtscape and identify a particular quality of thought or type of thought or individual thought that seems to be predominant this morning. And it doesn't matter what thought you pick. This is an exercise type thing. Yesterday, we used a physical sensation or emotion. Today, we're just picking on a thought. And see if you can grab a hold of that thought for just a little bit of time. So it could be like, I got to get my crock pot started. Or it could be something like, I wish I would have got the lead part in my grade 3 play. Any thought that comes up is perfect for the purposes of our exercise today. See if you can just hold on to that thought for a little while and really focus on it. Notice how your mood might shift, or if there are any changes in the sensations in your body as you hold on to that thought on purpose. And just see if you can just kind of take a snapshot of your experience in this moment. So when you're working with this particular thought, what is the impact on your soul, on your body, on your breath? And all thoughts have impacts on us. We don't realize that. We think we're in control of our bodies, but really it's the thoughts, and we're not always in control of the thoughts. Okay, so let's come into a little bit of movement. I'm going to come and join you on the mat. See, I've got my blanket here to support my hips. So this can all be done from a chair if sitting on the floor is uncomfortable. So sitting up nice and tall, sitting bones well rooted into whatever supports you have going on. Let's take a little inhale, lift the arms up, and exhale, hands to the heart. And let's continue with that. Just simple breathing, timing the movement with breath. And then let's add a little bit of sound. I'm going to add an Om chant as the hands come into my heart. Om. And I might bring that 2 more times. Om. Om. And if you like, you can keep the hands in a prayer-like gesture at your heart. Dip your chin towards the heart center and maybe reinforce kind of the theme of today's class in your own words, in your own way. But promise yourself that you will invest the time that we have together this morning to be open to thoughts and be willing to let them go if they no longer serve you. And then when you're ready, let's stretch the legs out in front of you. Wiggle the toes, roll the ankles around, and then bend the knees one at a time. Take the feet, kind of a generous distance apart. Feel free to support yourself on your fingertips behind you. And then just give your knees a little bit of a rock from side to side. Now I'm finding that I have a little bit too much height underneath my hips now. I'm going to roll off of it. So I'm going to just flatten up my blanket a little bit. You might need to do that as well. We'll just take a couple more rocks from side to side. Good. Ooh, some nice cracking there. Wonderful. And then when you have the knees facing over to your right, can we pause there? So the knees are facing to my right. And just for fun, take your hand underneath the left hip and notice how far away the left sitting bone is from the floor. There's probably a gap there. So just see if you can kind of get a little bit of a read on that. Now here's a first myth that we can kind of look at. You can say to yourself that this is the distance from my sitting bone to the floor, and this is the way my hips work. Let's just see, after we do a little bit of work from this position, if that myth is proven to be true, or should we let it go? So that Mythbusters show on TV, that's what we're doing today. If you want to take your hand and just take the thumb and forefinger to the crook of your leg here. So from where your belly kind of joins into the thigh, take a hold of the top of the thigh bone and gently roll this way and then roll back this way. Now you don't need a hand to do this, but I find touching the hand to this point in the body helps me imagine how the thigh bone is rolling in and rolling back out. And you notice I'm letting my body have a little movement that's inspired by the movement of the femur bone. Try to work into this for a little bit. Everyone's a bit different, till you sense that there's some willingness of the thigh bone to roll forward and then roll outward. And it might not be a big movement, but you just start to feel a little bit more comfort with the idea of the thigh bone rolling back and forth. And then if that's happening, then you can kind of let a little bit more happen here in the body. So whichever direction you were going, you kind of let the rest of the body start to really follow. And then of course the shoulder blade starts wanting to move forward and backwards. And then maybe the arm starts to follow along. So we didn't start that movement with the arm. We started that movement with the thigh bone. And then of course the waist came along, the ribs came along, the shoulder blade came along, and now the arm starts to make an arc. But we didn't start or lead that movement with the arm. It started with the thigh bone. Now, if we want to get the neck more involved, I love the idea of supporting the head with your hand. And then so that the head is really kept in line with the rest of the spine. So often when we do movements like this to look behind us as we back up our car, we're not being entirely honest with ourselves. We use the neck almost exclusively to do the twist, as opposed to using from the hips all the way up through the body. So this kind of keeps our head in line with the rest of the spine. So we're being very honest about where the twist is coming from. And you may start to feel like you're quite a bit more warmed up now. So let's let this movement go. Come back up to where we started and measure the distance from your left sitting bone to the floor. I have contact now. So there's a myth that I woke up with this morning, that my hips had a certain level of tension in them. And now I've proven that that myth really isn't true. So I wonder how many other thoughts, thousands, tens of thousands of thoughts are crowding into my head right now, leading me away from the truth, and yet I allow them to be there. So one by one, let's tease them out and figure out who we really are. Let's lift the knees up. If you want to challenge your core a little bit, do that without your hands, and drop your knees over to the other side. This is a whole new side of the body. A whole different set of stories has created the movement on this side. So it could feel quite different compared to what we did on the other side. So the first step here is to get a hold of your thigh bone and gently roll it in and roll it out. And like I said, this isn't a big movement. You don't have to hold the rest of your body rigid, of course. It's not a big movement, but we're just really seeing if we can visualize the thigh bone rolling out and rolling in. And if you don't want to use your hand to do this, you can just use your movement and your imagination to create a little bit more mobility in internal and external rotation of the thigh bone. Good. And then once you feel like you've loosened that up, even a micrometer, you can start to let the rest of the body move a little bit more. So in response to what the thigh bone is doing, the rest of the body might want to kind of move. And then the shoulder blade, eventually the movement comes up to the shoulder blade very naturally, not forcing, and then maybe the arm would move along with that. But we're not starting the movement with the arm. We're starting the movement with the movement in the hip joint. And if we were to practice this pattern of movement lots and lots of times during the day, we would re-educate the body that we don't start with the shoulder joint to do movement, and our shoulders would thank us because they get overused a lot. And then if we want to bring the head into it, it only feels natural at this point maybe, but make sure we support the head. So the head kind of has a natural integration with what's happening in the hips. This makes my neck very happy when it can viscerally or really physically understand that the hips will initiate the movement. It doesn't have to do, again, the work all by itself. And after a few more breaths, this might start to feel pretty loose and fluid. And we know that we've probably worked hard enough for today. And as we come back up to the original position, you may notice, just like we did on the other side, a bit less of a gap under the right sitting bone. And so all of that helps us to understand that we think our bodies are a certain way, we have a certain talent, or we have a certain shape, but actually everything's always changing. And when you're so stuck in thinking a certain way, you've missed the train. It's already pulled out of the station and a whole new paradigm is unfolding. So that's what happened in that pose. Let's come over to hands and knees. Now, if hands and knees are uncomfortable for you, your trusty chair can be most helpful as you use that to help you find your table pose. If you don't want to weight bear on one hand for whatever reason, then where's my trusty block? Some nice sturdy books, yoga block, something like that. That can be just what you need to weight bear on the shoulder so that you can find your table pose without having to weight bear on a hand or an arm. Okay, so we were talking about coming onto hands and knees. Make sure that your hips are more or less aligned over your knees to start with, that your shoulders are aligned over your wrists more or less to start with. And when your hands are spread out, there's an equal distance between all of the fingers. Press especially into the thumb and the index finger, kind of popping up the middle of your palm from the floor. We'll begin with just a nice gentle inhale, extending the spine. Exhale, hugging the belly in. And starting to just kind of wake up a little bit from the hips all the way up to the crown of the head, same as we did in that last movement. Each segment of the spine receiving equal attention. Good. And then let's add a little bit more. You may want to step your hands a little bit more forward or your knees or legs a little bit further back. So now there's more space. You're taking up more space on your mat. As you inhale, shift your weight forward so the shoulders come over the wrists. And as you exhale, you can round out again, but push the hips back towards the heels. Keep the elbows soft as you roll forward. Shoulders come over the wrists. Exhale, pull the belly up as you round out and pull your hips back towards the heels. Now, at any point, if the movements that I'm suggesting just physically don't suit you, go back to a version of this pose that was more accessible, or take a seat for a moment and visualize your body doing what my body's doing. That will really bring you into a lot of the same mental and emotional place, even though your body's not actually doing the movement. It's kind of really cool to try it just visually. It's probably a more sophisticated way, really, of practicing yoga. And then let's take our downward facing dog. For me here, I think I'm going to stay on my knees for this first one. For those of you on the chairs, you can take a modified down dog, hands on the chair, legs step back, knees stay soft and slightly bent. Take a deep breath in and out. And then we'll come back up to all fours. I'm going to turn sideways so you can see a little bit better. You're fine where you are. Take your right leg out and press the foot into the floor. Now, if you were using a chair because you don't care to weight bear on your knees, the movement is just a bit of a wide-legged stance. and follow along from there. Okay, so we've got our left hip directly over our left knee. So that this side of the body is basically in a truncated mountain pose. The foot out to the side is pressing actively into the floor, so it's not a lazy leg out here. Inhale, lift up your arm. Exhale, lean out over the leg. Keep moving like that for a few breaths as we just kind of warm up into this lateral stretch. If your arm's getting tired, how about tucking it around behind the back gently and moving like this? So either option is there for you. And then after you've taken the stretch a few times and the movement starting to feel a bit more fluid, let's see about holding the stretch. And just like we did before, let's bend the elbow, cushion the back of the head. Now, if your hand is wrapped around behind your back, don't worry about it. This is only if your shoulder's happy being in this position for a while. Lean your head back into the little cup you've created with your palm, and notice how that helps to support a nice smile-like curve with the entire spine. So we're really trying to elongate up out of the pelvis, but we're also smiling to one side. So a lot of times we go into this stretch, and I'm going to demonstrate, I don't want you to do this, but a lot of times we go into this stretch and we just drop the ear to the shoulder. The body itself is still kind of upright, but we've dropped the ear to the shoulder. This is telling ourselves an untruth. We're living in a lie. But angling right out of the pelvis and keeping the head up a little bit, now we have a nice arc over to the side. Take one more breath. And then let's come out of that either to mountain pose, or we'll just sit on our heels briefly. I'm going to take that to the other side. So we're going to look at some of these common sort of habits we might have in our asana today, and notice where we're kind of deluding ourselves. So again, we start with a dynamic movement, inhaling and exhaling. And when you practice looking at the truth in these kind of things, I mean, it really doesn't matter the angle of your head, whether you turn your head first or not. I mean, it could make your neck a little happier if you change that, but I mean, the world's not going to stop spinning. But the more you practice looking at the truth, what's actually going on in your yoga poses, then you're going to be able to take that skill and look at other things like relationships. Good. And then let's hold the stretch, bending the elbow. Now I'm showing one version of the pose. I explained on the other side, there's many different ways to do this. Find the version that's more authentic for you, that makes more sense to you, that's your truth. Because that's the only thing that really matters is your truth, not mine, not some dude who wrote a book, even thousands of years ago, is your truth in this moment is what matters. Take another nice deep breath. And then let's come back up and let's join together in mountain pose. And notice I tried to do that without using my hands so that I was kind of developing a little core stability and confidence. Okay, I'm into my mountain pose. Take a moment to notice the fluidity that we've been working on creating in the body. Do you feel any evidence of that? So I'm often interested in my yoga practice as it unfolds, that I think I'm feeling fine. And then I start getting into doing some postures and I realize, wow, I was carrying so much tightness or so much tension that I'm just so habitually used to. And we kind of addressed a bit of that yesterday. So noticing your mountain pose, if you feel any enhanced sense of fluidity after those few opening stretches. So we're going to come into tree pose. And before you grab the normal props, before you start panicking because balancing isn't your thing, or before you get really confident on tree pose, I've been doing that for decades. It's so boring. Let's look at those thoughts that are coming up as you're preparing to come into this pose. What's your expectations of it? What are your expectations of your body in this pose? What do you like? What do you don't like? And then I'm going to just suggest you come into the version of tree pose that you can sustain for a few breaths, that won't take you away from being able to concentrate on the thoughts as they shift and develop. So that might mean for you that you keep the big toe on the ground, that you don't lift your foot right up. It might mean for you that you have a wall or a chair beside you so you don't have to worry about balance. For my more flexible friends, it might mean that your foot doesn't come as far up the leg, because a lot of people just grab a hold of the foot and bring it right up, which is really like sexy looking, but that's not their authentic pose. This is as deep as I can bring my knee into flexion and my hip without using my hands. So this is my true pose. And then look at the alignment of the standing leg side. Are you letting that hip weighing way out there? Can you bring it back in line with the ankle and the shoulder on this side? And then whatever you choose to do with your hands is what's sustainable and comfortable and feels right for you. So how many different thoughts are starting to go through your mind? And how destabilizing are some of those thoughts? Because this is in a balanced pose, this is where you really start to see how much our thoughts fluctuate, how we have trouble focusing on where we want to focus. So just watching that process. Taking maybe one more breath here. And then releasing out of this pose, coming back to mountain pose and taking a short pause to reflect on your opinions of tree pose on that side. And like Darkis mentioned, the stories that we weave around that. And then whenever you're ready, coming into the pose on the other side. And again, it might look different on this side, and that's perfectly appropriate. Watching the thoughts today. Taking a couple more deep breaths here. And then releasing out of mountain pose and out of tree pose, coming to mountain pose and taking a couple breaths here in mountain pose just to absorb and watch the thoughts, how they settle down or don't settle down. What is the quality of the thoughts? As I've watched my thoughts over the years, I've realized that I'm a compulsive planner and I'm horribly judgmental. That fits in with my general constitutional type, being a bit pitta dominant, which comes from the world of Ayurveda, which is a whole other subject. But it is kind of uncomfortable to be in my head sometimes with all that judgment and all that expectation. And always trying to be in control. So everybody has a different sort of constitutional blend, but that's what I've noticed by watching my thoughts. So when I realize, for example, I'll just digress for a moment. I'm in a social situation, maybe with family, and something's happening that I think is disorganized. It gets me so upset. And I get so frustrated and I want to burst in and say, look, get out of my way. I'll get this all organized for you. You go sit down. And I realized that is those thoughts coming out. And after years of yoga practice, I have strategies now to go to the breath maybe, or to do a visualization or a little stretch, or listen to the sound of Om mentally in my mind, anything I need to, so that I don't follow that gut instinct to go bully those people into doing it properly, because they're not doing it properly. So that's why observing your thoughts can be so helpful in everyday life, because you get used to your particular thought signatures, your stories, and you can start to detach from the effects of those. Let's turn sideways on the mat and take a fairly wide stance. And you may recall in our hips class last Wednesday, we worked a lot on this pose. And we also did some work in our hips today to help us prepare. But instead of just turning the toes to the left side of the mat, I'd like to think about turning the thigh bone out. So would it be helpful for you to have your hand on your thigh bone, the way we did in the beginning, and practice rolling that thigh bone right out, so that you're trying to get the maximum external rotation of the femur in the hip socket, so that now your knee is naturally pointing towards the short edge of the mat and the toes are in line with the knee. So we didn't turn the toes, we turned the thigh. Now I'm finding that I'm feeling a little tiny bit jammed in my hip. So that's when I take this leg, step it forward 1/2 inch, maybe do a little internal rotation on this thigh bone. Now I feel like I'm standing more naturally. So in yoga classes, Oda and I had quite a conversation, you know, Oda, after Wednesday's class. And she said that when they used to have lines on the mat when she took her Iyengar classes, and you had to get your heels to a certain point and all this kind of stuff. We're kind of getting away from that a little bit in my practice, because those old ideas don't fit my womanly body. They don't fit my aging body. So we have to get rid of those old thoughts and find a way that to practice that suits me a little bit better. And it's okay to have a little bit of a flex in this knee. We don't want to lock that knee. Let's come in and out of triangle a couple times. We'll do this with the breath. I'll kind of try to talk you through it, and then we might hold the pose. So initially inhale, open the arms. Exhale, fold to one side. Keep elongating the spine. Inhale, take the top arm up over your head, and exhale, come back up. Now I'm going to show a modification if this arm doesn't want to do that. Inhale, maybe the arm comes up. Exhale, coming into the triangle pose. Inhale, lengthen the spine out to the left. And then exhale, come back up. So notice I didn't move the top arm. So if your shoulder's a little uncomfortable, know that that's there for you. One more time. Inhale, exhale, inhale, and exhale. And now I might consider holding the extended triangle pose for a few breaths. So this is a little bit of an echo of what we did in gate pose earlier on our knees. Really pressing into the outer edge of the right foot, activating the right gluteus muscles, and lengthening the top arm or the crown of the head away from the left foot. So some of the things we've told ourselves over the years in triangle is we have to get the bottom hand to the floor or to a block. We don't have to do that. Some of the things we've told ourselves in triangle pose is that we have to push the hips way out to the left. We don't have to do that. And of course, the alignment of the feet that I mentioned earlier, all those things, all those rules and thoughts, we don't have to live with them. So what else is coming up for you as you hold Trikonasana for another breath or two? What other thoughts present themselves? And is that really where you want to be? And when you're ready, we'll release. So you notice we're holding the poses a little bit longer maybe than we typically would. And again, being more comfortable with the uncomfortable. So holding in a pose gives us time to really dig a little deeper. Let's take the right thigh bone, turn it out. So we're moving from the thigh. The knee naturally points to the short edge of the mat, and the toes align that way too. Little flex in the right knee if you need it. Adjust the left leg so that you feel a little bit more comfortable and spacious in the pelvis. And then we'll move. Inhale, exhale, inhale, and exhale. And I'm going to demonstrate just if that shoulder doesn't want to lift up too high. One more time moving. And maybe we'll hold the posture. You can always elect to keep moving. But if you choose to hold the posture, you may find that you have a little bit more time and energy to observe the thoughts as they bubble up. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a pattern to our thinking. There's a habit to our thinking. And I wonder if those thoughts could be some of the things that are keeping you in your discomfort. The stories we tell about ourselves, to ourselves. Taking a couple more breaths here if you can. It's not an easy pose. And on your next exhale, pulling up out of the pose and turning the feet parallel. And then we're going to come back down to the floor. I'm going to fold my blanket again. So I have about 1 inch or 2 of blanket underneath my sitting bones. You may find that you need a little more or a little less than that. Hook the edge of your sitting bones right over the edge of the blanket. And we'll just start in our staff pose here. For those of us who might find it difficult to get a hold of a foot, you may want to have a yoga strap or an old tie or something like that handy. A TheraBand will work. So we're going to come into a pose that's sometimes called the archer. And it's kind of an interesting pose. We're going to build it up in stages. Come as far as you're comfortable. And when you can not have any energy left to observe your thoughts, you've gone too far, back up a little bit. So let's go back to what we did in the beginning of class where the knees were bent and we just fold from side to side a couple times. I'm up on a higher support now, so it's to kind of be careful. Good, there we go. If you find your support's too high, adjust your blanket now. Okay, so then what we're going to do, if we can, is we are going to take the left leg, bring it in, and see if you can grab a hold of your big toe. Now, this is where you may want to have a strap or a belt, just if this is not really a good thing for you to be doing. Now, in the meantime, what we want to do is we want to use the other hand, perhaps, you don't have to, but the other hand could help you find a nice, long, tall spine. Now, your body might be angled back a little bit, but your spine is still long. We haven't hunched over. So sitting up nice and proud. So come in here if you can. Now, the next step, and you don't have to come here, but I'm trying to bring us into a place, and everyone's in their own individual spot, trying to bring us into a place where you're forced to really think. See if you can lift this foot up. Keep your spine long. Good. Keep drawing this knee up towards this shoulder. So it's almost like a happy baby sort of pose, but you're upright. So this is pretty fun. If you're okay here, you can take your other hand to this foot. Now you don't have to. If you're using a strap, I'd suggest stick to one leg. Can you straighten this leg right out? So you kind of start to see the shape of the archer drawing back his bow. I'm balanced on the sitting bones. My chest is lifted, my spine is long. So this might not be your shape today. This might be much better of a shape. Maybe this is your archer shape for today, and maybe you're using a strap in order to make that connection. So where are you? Where are your thoughts? If you don't come to this shape, are you feeling less than a yogi? If your body is doing something different, if you've chosen a completely different pose, does that make you less than a yogi? So looking at the thoughts, residing here for 2 more breaths. And then let's release the feet from the strap, whatever we've got going on, and come back to the home pose of staff pose. That was an interesting journey. So it's not about creating sexy poses, but we can use the more challenging poses to help us get deeper into our minds. That's pretty good. That's worthwhile. But all bodies have to find the pose through their own path. That's something that's really hard maybe for you, especially if you kind of have some of the same thoughts that I do about the right way to do things and always want to be in control. It can be hard to admit your body doesn't want to do it the way other people do it. Okay, let's bend the knees, do a little side to side, make sure we release the hips as much as we can. And then I'm going to take the other big toe into hand. So this might be my start, and I might be using a strap here. I might be using my hand behind me to support, or I might be coming into the full archer pose on the other side. I've been practicing yoga pretty much daily for about 20 years now. I sold my sign business in 1999, just before Christmas. And so in the year 2000, I used a little bit of the proceeds from that to kind of figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And in that time, I started taking yoga very seriously. There are still tons of yoga poses that I cannot do anything like they show in the books. And for a long time, I wondered if I could call myself a yoga teacher if I wasn't able to do these fancy poses. I got over it. But that's part of the yoga practice. Can you hold here for one more breath, whatever expression of archer pose that you found? Wonderful. And then releasing, let's come back to staff pose. Make sure your knees are a bit soft. You're going to come into a little bit of a forward fold here. So when you're ready, let's inhale. As you exhale, angle your back forward, ears stay in between upper arms. Inhale, come back up. So I'm trying to keep the spine long. From the sitting bones to the tips of my fingers is one more or less straight line as I angle forward. I'm using those hip joints, where we've been working a lot today, to make the bend. So again, a lot of us have come through yoga thinking that we have to have perfectly straight knees or that we have to touch our toes. Today, I'm using Paschimottanasana to teach us how to keep a long spine. So at some point, when you feel like you're a bit more lubricated here, we can angle the body forward, let the arms come to the floor. They don't have to touch your feet. You don't need a strap. And continue to lengthen the spine out of the pelvis. So you're not trying to get your head down to your feet or your shins. And as you hold this forward fold, let the thoughts come. Let your mind review. The nature of the thoughts. Now, one of the things I think is a very nice thing to subscribe to in this posture is to try to create equal sensation from the heels all the way up through the backs of the legs, over the low back, upper back, middle back, all the way to the crown of the head. So if you review the whole back of your body and you notice one part of the back of your body is going like beep, 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 then is there a way to shift your position so that the sensations are equalized from the heels right up to the back of the head? Maybe that means you don't bend forward as much, or you bend your knees a little bit more. And all of those things are really interesting. One of the things I find creates a more equal sensation is to flex my feet. So then the sensation of stretch really does start at the heels all the way up through the calves. Take a couple more breaths here. And then when you're ready, maybe using your hands on the ground as support for your back as you come back up to the staff pose. The next pose I was going to suggest is an upward facing table, or you might choose to go to full upward facing plank. If that's not going to work for you for whatever reason, like maybe your shoulders or your wrists just won't do that today, I'll meet you on your back because I'm going to come there in the next pose. But if you would like to try the upward facing table with me, bend your knees, not at a full 90 degrees. Keep your feet fairly far away from you, because when you come up, we're going to be pushing the knees forward over the ankles. So have a pretty big bend. Maybe I'll go sideways so this shows a little bit better. And then let's move in and out of this dynamically a couple times. So inhale, push yourself up, push the knees forward, extend the spine. Exhale, lower the hips. Inhale, come up, and exhale, lower down. You can move dynamically like that a few times. Like I said, if your shoulders and wrists don't like this posture, that's pretty common. So come onto your back in constructed rest. I'll be there in just a second. And then we might choose to hold the posture, upward facing table. Try to keep your neck in line with the rest of your spine so the head's not thrown back. The other option would be to extend the legs, push all 5 toes on each foot down into the floor, and use your inclined plank variation, Purvottasana. Take a couple more deep breaths. This is a very demanding posture. Really will help you to dig a bit deeper into that thought pool. Beautiful. Inhale one more time. And exhale, lower down. And then let's join everybody together onto our backs. Just going to adjust my blanket so I have support under my spine. And if you have a block handy, you might find that useful here. The other thing that you could use would be a full box of Kleenex or a full roll of toilet paper. And if you don't have any of those things, but you had a strap earlier, you could tie the strap around your thighs. We're going to use that in our bridge pose today, just to kind of remind us that we can make a lot of compensations in our poses, and we don't have to be aware of what we're doing unless we choose to. Let me explain. So I see this a lot when I teach yoga. People are going to come into bridge pose. They have a little tightness in their hips or low back. Most of us do. We sit so much, you know. And they come into bridge pose and their knees splay out. So this is a different pose. It's not really bridge pose. And it's allowing people to kind of fall into old patterns with their hips. If you're falling into old patterns in your hip joint, you're falling into old patterns in your thinking. So I'm going to challenge us today to take the block and place it between the knees. If you don't have the block, try tying your strap around your thighs. Let's come into bridge pose a couple times. This is going to kind of remind us to keep the thigh bones in alignment with each other, not allow the hips to splay open, and just see if that brings up some new thoughts. So when you're ready, press your feet into the ground. Inhale. This is kind of the same motion we did in table a moment ago. Exhale, lower down. And we're really, again, looking at the hip joints like we did in the beginning of our class today. Notice how the hip joints move. Now this lifting up like this, typically this is where we have restriction in our hip joints, is in extension. So notice when you hold the leg bones really kind of in line with each other, the extension of the hips is the only movement available. We can't be doing external rotation and abduction like we normally do. So even for seasoned yogis, this can be rather humbling. You may choose to hold the posture as we have done in the routine quite a bit today, noticing how you can push into the heels, lift from where the thigh meets the buttock back here, and see if you can get a little bit more lift out of the hip joint itself. Holding for a couple more breaths. And when you're ready, lower down slowly and we can move the block or untie the tie. You might want to stretch your legs out for a moment. Just a mini Shavasana. Okay. The other posture I love to highlight that we often tell ourselves stories about is we like to feel flexible, right? I mean, we do a lot of yoga, so we want to be able to think of ourselves as real flexible. And it's that figure 4 stretch. So I'll show it and hopefully this makes sense. People will come into the figure 4 stretch and they'll do this. They'll lift up their head and shoulders. They'll lift up their buttocks. They'll get a hold and they'll say, look how flexible I am. Well, you're flexible in some places that are normally very flexible when you do it that way. So let's try doing it in a way that will truthfully tell us, because this is supposed to be, the figure 4 stretch is supposed to be a stretch for the piriformis. It's an external rotator muscle in the buttock. Very important muscle, and it needs to be stretched. Let's keep our backs on the ground. So rather than lift up the buttocks and roll up like that, let's keep our buttocks firmly on the ground. Draw the knee in, point the knee out to the side, and cross the ankle without using your hands at all. No hands. Now notice that the little curve in your low back is still arched, that your buttocks is still down on the ground. It hasn't been lifted up. Now, if you decide you're going to take a hold of your leg and pull the legs closer, the cross legs closer, don't lift up your head and shoulders. Leave your arms on the ground. Lift this foot up and see how much you can bring the legs in without lifting up the buttocks. See what I mean? It's a lot harder. So you might not, I can't reach my hands around the front of my shin. If I'm really conscientious, I might be able to get them around the back of the thigh, but it's a bit of a tight squeeze. I think a strap would do me better today. So notice when you practice with authenticity, when you cut through all of the stories about how flexible we are, we find out the truth. Maybe your foot actually needs to stay on the ground because this lifting motion can't happen from the hip joints. It only happens from the low back muscles, and we really don't want to tax them today. So maybe we stay here. So I see it all the time, how attached yogis are in class to thinking of themselves as uber flexible. I'll tell you what's been really humbling for me is as I've gotten older, every morning I get out of bed and I feel stiffer and stiffer. And so that's why I started thinking about all of this stuff, about overstretching and moving into places that are already mobile and don't need to be mobilized that much more. Okay, let's release figure 4 on that side. Take a breath. And then as authentically as possible, move into the stretch on the other side. And notice what you can do without lifting your head and shoulders, keeping your shoulders back on the floor, keeping your whole bottom on the floor. And really, I don't have the strap handy right now, but I think, to be honest with myself, I think I should have a strap right now in order to keep this alignment rather than this alignment. Yeah. So without the strap in hand, I think I better keep the foot on the floor. And now I'm getting a proper stretch for the piriformis, and that's what this pose is supposed to be all about. Take a couple more breaths here. And then release both feet back to the floor. The last pose I want to look at is a supine twist. And we all have our habits and there's lots of people who like to get a crack out of their back when they do a supine twist. That might not be healthy for you in the long run. So what is your real twist? Well, we often try to get the knees all the way to the floor or something like that. I don't really want to do that today. So I'm going to ask you to lift your hips up a little bit from the floor and plop them down on the left side of your mat. So it's almost like you were going to do bridge pose, but then your hips got dropped back down to the ground and they're off center to the rest of your body. Take your right leg, stretch it out on the floor, and bring your left knee in towards your chest. Use your right hand to just hook underneath the left thigh. So there's a gentle connection there. This left arm can just rest out on the floor. And then we'll move into this dynamically as we have so many postures today. Start to roll the left knee across your body over onto the right hip, and then roll back. So let's get that movement so it's a bit more fluid. I'm not looking for a big crack in my back. And I'm not looking to get the left knee all the way to the floor on the other side of me. I'm just looking to create some fluidity as I move back and forth. And then as we have in all the other postures, we might choose to hold the posture. But I don't have to get this leg all the way to the floor. I can support the left leg with my right hand, if that's available, so that I feel like I can let the weight of my body sink down, the weight of my legs sink down, but there's no pressure to get it all the way to the ground.
For some bodies, always rushing to get this leg all the way to the floor over there could actually aggravate conditions such as sciatica. So sometimes we get a flare up of something like that, and we're like, where did that come from? Well, it could have been not telling your truth in this pose, thinking that the way to do it was to get the leg all the way to the ground, but in reality, that wasn't the healthiest thing for you. Let's take one more breath here. And then we'll slowly bring the leg back up, adjust our hips back to the center of the mat. Take a breath in and out. Then lift the hips, plop them down on the right side of the mat. So once again, our hips are off center to the rest of the body. Stretch out the left leg, bring the right knee in, support it with the left hand, right arms out to the side, and we'll just roll back and forth a couple times. Trying to be as soft and fluid as you can. Now, why would you take all this extra time with your body? Why wouldn't you just come into the twist? You know how to do it. Maybe you are very flexible. You can get the foot all the way to the floor, no problem. Why wouldn't you just do the pose? Well, this gives your body the clear message that you're interested in its individual experience today. That if it's uncomfortable for you to slow down and take more time to get into your postures, that you're willing to take the time to listen. And then we might hold the posture for a few breaths once you've found your range of motion. So always doing the same thing the same way will release the same result. I like to think of my yoga practice as an experimentation or a growth opportunity, a place where I bring my life issues and I try to work them out. And so if I'm doing the same pose the same way all the time, I'm going to get the same result. So it's interesting to shake things up, try different things, think about it from a different angle, and then change happens. Change that I've brought up from the wisest, most patient, most peaceful part of myself. And presumably that will lead me away from suffering. After a couple more breaths, let's release, bring the feet to the floor, adjust the hips back to neutral, and it might be time to stretch out into your Shavasana pose. So take your time to get warm again. Arrange pillows and blankets to support you. I don't know where our time goes. And as best as you can, stretch out so that the earth can support the majority of your body weight. Just taking a couple breaths here, just a couple minutes to release all need for movement. And to see if it's possible to still stay open to the flow of thoughts through the brain. Some of my teachers talk about seeing thoughts as clouds in the sky. The sky is infinite and open and spacious. And the clouds cross through our field of vision, changing even as we watch them, morphing into different shapes and amassing and dispersing in a unique and never-ending rhythm. Some of my teachers say that thoughts are like that. Our mind is wide and open and spacious like the sky. And our thoughts cross over our field of vision for a short time, always changing.
Sometimes the thoughts crowd in, a stormy sky. And sometimes the sky is fairly clear and open. So whatever the state of your sky today, allow that. Be interested in that. Watch the clouds. If you have some more time to focus on this activity, that would be great. But I have gone a couple minutes over again. So if you wish, you could make your way slowly to a seated position. And we could share a closing Om together. I'm inhaling now. Namaste. I would love to chat for a minute. If you can just give me a second.